So thank you everybody for investing and prioritizing some of your time, some of your valuable time today, and prioritizing your time and your well-being, and joining us for this this short webinar titled Rediscovering Your Resilience. My name is Payne. I'm the lead wellbeing coach here at Wellbeing People, where we have a vision to empower as many people as possible to really live their very best life, to live your very best life for the longest. I'm really pleased and excited actually to be joined by Charlotte, who's joining us today and going to share some of her insight and wisdom around this really, really fascinating topic of resilience. So how are you feeling today, Charlotte?
I'm feeling really, really good, thank you. I've been on a course most of the week, so I've been learning myself, and so that always energizes me. So I'm feeling very, very well. I'd say probably out of 10, I'd probably say a 9 out of 10 today, which is pretty strong.
Oh, no, do you know what? I was just thinking that myself about that question, that scaling question. I was just thinking, where am I? I think I'm up there as well. I'm doing okay. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling pretty good today, which is lovely.
Sunshine makes a difference for us, doesn't it, as well? I mean, Brits, sunshine. Oh.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do, we're going to be as interactive as we possibly can, Charlotte. But just before I get into just some more formal introductions, I just want to just briefly speak about housekeeping and encourage everybody today to utilize that chat function as much as possible, to share your reflections, your opinions, your ideas, your thoughts, some of the answers to certainly some of the questions that Charlotte's going to be posing and that we might be posing as well. And if you want your answer to be seen by just myself and Charlotte, just ensure that drop-down tab just reads the host and panelists. If you want it to be seen by everybody, and we sometimes encourage that, so we get that kind of community feel in there, where people tend to share best practice and we get a glimpse into other people's lives, which is really wonderful as well. So utilize that chat function, make it as interactive as you feel like you want to make it also. Today's session is being recorded, just to let everybody know, and we're going to aim, aren't we, Charlotte, to have that little turnaround time at the end and finish 55 minutes at the latest, I guess, so 5 to 12, something like that. So let me begin then by introducing Charlotte. And Charlotte's a positive organizational psychology consultant and trainer, and a mental health first aid trainer as well. And you have your own business, and you're a founder and owner, Charlotte, of leadership and wellbeing consultancy that helps leaders and businesses build mentally fitter workplaces as well. And I'm really excited to be talking to you because we've kind of collaborated once or twice before and connected once or twice before. And I'm really excited to hear from you today. I guess when I think about resilience, there's certain things, I mean, I've always been fascinated by it. Why is it that one person seems to cope much better in a situation or with adversity than perhaps another person? And it's always kind of fascinated me a little bit. What is it then about resilience, Charlotte, that really kind of triggers and inflames your imagination or really interests you?
I think quite similar to you, actually, Grant, there, that the way that some people find that challenges actually make them more resilient. So that's what most of the research shows, is that actually people who've been through tough times end up being more resilient as a result. So I think that's quite fascinating. And especially a lot of the research now coming out around the genetic impact of how we're wired, and actually not so much that bit, but how much we can change the impact of our genetic base structure, as it were. So it's something called epigenetics, and how even if we've not got the building blocks that gave us the best start in life, we can overcome those, and actually we can change how those genes are expressed. So we're never restricted by our backgrounds. We've always got this opportunity to become more resilient and to change the way we think and feel. So I think that's really fascinating, that that we're not limited by our past experiences. We've always got an opportunity, and that's certainly for me what I've found. So I got into this career basically through making every mistake in the book when it comes to looking after my own well-being. I always really quite honest about that. My view of resilience used to be, you're always fine. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. I can deal with anything, and you can give me more work to do, and everything's fine, and I'm just fine. And I think that is quite a traditional view of resilience, and it's often why people don't even like the word resilience, because there's maybe a sense of well, I often talk about the idea of being like strong like an oak tree, like nothing's going to move me. But in fact, oak trees aren't that strong at all. They're not as strong as something like a palm tree, which flexes and moves with the wind. And so for me, I was put into a management role when I was relatively young, with very little support. Didn't look after myself, started working 6 days a week, 14, 16 hours a day, and got myself to a real crisis point where I was questioning the meaning of life. And it was my recovery from that then made me realize that my previously conceived view that resilience was about always pretending I was fine and trying to grit my teeth and get through was not actually effective. And then my master's, so that was kind of the start of my research into psychology and organizational psychology. I subsequently went back and retrained in positive psychology, and my focus was CEO burnout and this area of post-traumatic growth, and actually how challenges can make us more resilient, and how we facilitate that, and how we can make sure that stress is embraced as a good thing, because it is. And that's obviously what we'll talk about a lot today. About resilience is not thinking I will never feel stressed. Resilience is not about ever thinking I'll always be able to cope with everything and I'll never have any discomfort in my life. It's actually making sure that we get comfortable with a bit of discomfort.
Wow, I love that. I love that. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's difficult to know what we don't know. So a lot of today's, I guess, is about raising awareness around some of our current behaviors, some of our current reflections around how we perceive situations, how we cope with some of our behaviors and what we think and stuff like that. We'll talk about all of those things today. Okay, so what we're going to do, what I'd like to do is just to share the answer. I'm going to share end the poll. If you haven't done the welcome poll, you've got 10 seconds to go on it. Ready? 3, 2, 1. That's not stressful, is it? There you go. Go for that. But let me end the poll and share the results. So hopefully you can all see this. Give me a quick raise the hand if you can see this poll on your screen. Super. Thank you very much. So people hoping for some useful tips. The topic, again, it's one of those topics, isn't it? People are generally interested in stress. I find stress resilience. People are often interested in sleep. You know, people are very quick. I don't know about you, Charlotte. You find people are very quick to tell other people they've had a brilliant night's sleep, or they're very quick to say, "I've had a really bad night's sleep." And yeah, so it is an interesting topic.
That's the one I hear whenever you ask how I. Oh, sorry, that was just me agreeing with you. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. And again, there's a really important question here around kind of, being as present as possible today. So taking our time to put away those distractions and stay as fully focused as you possibly can today, and invest and prioritize you just for this short time today. We have a question about kind of your role within your business. And we have this wide variety, but of course, as we would expect, I guess, Charlotte, wouldn't we, in how people are feeling at any point in any day. And again, what's been the great thing to happen to you over the last few weeks? It's been wonderful to see those reflections in that chat function. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. What we have got for everybody is a slide deck. So we're going to be bouncing through this slide deck, Charlotte and I, discussing a few points on each of these slides. And I'm just going to jump straight into it and we'll get cracking into the session. Okay, can you see that slide deck? Have you got that? Nice one. I always check because I have that real worry, sometimes. But okay. So today, everybody, as I said, it's a wonderful opportunity to discover different ways that we're going to promote and empower you to live your best life. But it's also worth remembering, as I'm sure Charlotte's alluded to already, that your life and my life will always be slightly different. We're all very different people in different ways. So throughout this webinar today, we're certainly going to encourage you to take what's helpful from today, whatever that means for you. Be as present as you possibly can. Give yourself permission today to be present. It's not just Charlotte and I inviting you to give yourself permission. It's you giving yourself permission today. Challenge what doesn't seem right to you today. If there's anything that jumps up, please ask questions. Use that chat function again to share your responses. If there's any specific questions, then drop them in the Q&A tab. And question as much as you want to, and always be on the lookout for that one thing that's going to kind of trigger and inflame your perhaps engagement in perhaps taking some action. to change how resilient you feel and what benefits are going to make and change how you approach it. So today, as you can see, we're going to embrace stress. We're going to talk a little bit about finding that sweet spot. Charlotte's going to share some strategies and some ideas and some information around certain strategies for resilience. And we're going to encourage you today, absolutely, to commit, to discover, to reflect, and commit around perhaps a behavioural experiment that resonates with you, that you might want to kind of move forward with just for the next 5 or 7 days and see how we get on. And as we said, you know, what good thing has happened to you in the last few weeks? Getting that mind in that right place. It's lovely to reflect around those good and great things that happen to us. So let me just jump into the next slide, which is a little bit more around understanding stress and just to bring it to life a little bit more about understanding stress in the workplace and out of the workplace, and finding out, you know, that perfect level of stress. Now, employees tend to, employees tend to experience unhelpful stress in a workplace that, you know, when your resources or capacity to work kind of sometimes exceed the demands that end up being placed upon you. So the data that we looked at here, or that I looked at here, was this workplace health report, shows that by far the most common source of negative stress at work is workload, with other commonly cited issues, as you can see up on your screen here, in the forms of lack of control and lack of support as well. Now, as a manager or as a leader, it might be that some of these factors are out of our control, possibly, or beyond our control, but increasing the resources that are available for employees will, of course, you know, help them to better manage their demands that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So also, we have not just reasons for negative stresses at work, but also reasons for negative stress outside of the workplace as well. And with the last couple of years, of course, you know, blurring the lines between work and home, you know, that connection between our personal and our professional lives has become a little bit blurred, and it's been felt possibly a little bit more intensely than before. So it's common for both perhaps employers and employees to compartmentalize certain difficulties, and naturally stresses outside the workplace, of course, will impact performance inside of the workplace and vice versa. So I want to bring this to life again, and just ask you all to share your thoughts really around, let me just pull my chat function down so I can see what's going on. There we go. Around this question, and encourage you to reflect right now. So which statement about stress at work do you most agree with? So I'm going to encourage you just to reflect around this statement. Do you most agree with the statement that there's no stress at work? And that might be number one. Just pop in a number for me in that chat function. Do you most agree with that for you, there's a perfect amount of stress that helps you thrive at work? Is stress a negative, does it have a negative impact, but you feel like you can cope at work? Or number four, as you can see, overwhelmed with stress, but you can't cope, or you feel you cannot cope at work. And again, we're getting some interesting reflections popping up here. Thank you so much for taking the time. Lovely reflections. And I guess, you know, the reason I'm sharing this, you know, employees we're always trying to strive really to find that sweet spot, aren't we, where employees, where the people that we work with or manage or lead are productive but challenged, but not at the expense, of course, of their health and their well-being and their happiness. So it's important here to recognize that stress isn't always a bad thing, as Charlotte was kind of alluding to earlier on. It can help motivate, it can help drive us forward, can't it, and meet the challenges and difficulties and adversities of our day. And we're getting some really interesting reflections popping in. Thank you for those reflections. Charlotte, is there anything that you want to add at this point? I know that you've been paying attention to that chat function.
Yeah, I am, and I'm looking at it, and it's an interesting one, because I think what's coming up for me is so much of this is about the language, isn't it? Are we talking stress? Are we talking pressure? Sometimes what feels stressful can feel exciting. So I think I saw that Dorothy said earlier something about like living with stress is not good, and I think this is where we're going to get into it. It's the nuances of that word in itself is just fascinating for me. So yeah, but looking forward to getting into it.
I know. I can see you itching. Charlotte's going to dive a little bit more deeply into this. We're just kind of laying the foundations a little bit for Charlotte. Look at Charlotte's eyebrows raising. She's ready to roll. Super. Okay, let's move on to the next one, because I really want to get Charlotte on board here. So let's talk a little bit about resilience. Now, let me ask everyone that's attending here right now, what does resilience mean to you? What words jump into your brain when you hear the word resilient or resilience? Perhaps it's a phrase. No, lovely reflections. Really nice reflections. Some of them are quite simple, they're all, fairly similar. What are your reflections and thoughts as these are jumping in, Charlotte?
Well, I'm struck by is it's very much, and maybe this is me coming at with the perspective of a positive psychology researcher, is that it's very much about getting through, surviving, bouncing back. Whereas actually, what about thriving? What about resilience being, regardless of what's going on around us, being able to thrive, being able to maintain? So there's it's much more about coping or bouncing back. Whereas I'd like to think of it as maybe bouncing forward, actually using those as why do we want to bounce back to where we were before? We want to progress. We want to be more excited, more, and I think that's for me, that's what's coming up for me is we've always traditionally thought of resilience as being this surviving, getting through, being okay. What about being brightened, being enlivened, being invigorated, being motivated, being engaged, and specifically in the workplace? That's that sort of sweet spot of pressure, let's call it. We don't want people to feel attached to the word stress, but that pressure where we're like, yeah, okay, I can do this. This is a bit out of my comfort zone, but it's going to give me the opportunity to shine. So that's my perspective on resilience, and I'd hope that maybe that just even that thought can spark some ideas for people. If could that be resilience for you? Yeah,
no, lovely, absolutely. But so when we start to think about, as you say, bouncing forward, this often involves kind of things that we do and how we think. So again, the session as well is today is around raising awareness around some of our current behaviours as well. So the people that are watching, people that are attending, take a short moment now just to reflect around what is it that you do? What coping strategy or action do you employ? What is something that you actually do that's a really beneficial, helpful and healthy way that you feel encourages you to cope better with a stressful situation, adversity or difficulty? What is it that you do that helps you cope better?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, Grant? Because just while people are putting those ideas in, there's an element where we have to cope with the situation before we bounce forward, right? So we need to get back on our feet, and maybe there's elements for some of you, exactly as Michelle said there, that the deep breaths get us back on track. They kind of ground us again, and then we can think about prioritizing and stepping forward, or do I need to step back? And the same might be for the stress bucket, or for Tracy, they're walking away. There might be behavioral elements that need to get us on track before we say, right, now I'll choose to step forward. I'll choose to walk in. I'll walk, to empower myself. So there's sometimes it's about having to do something first to calm our nervous response before we take that action. But some really nice things. It's an interesting to see how many people are talking about breathing. This course I've been working on this week, and I've been talking a lot to people ex-military people. And sometimes we go, oh, well, yeah, breathing, that's about yoga, you know, that's about that one thing. But actually, even people in the military saying, what's your one key resilience skill on the front line? Your breath.
Yeah.
And it's so fantastic to see that actually that people are using that. Simple things like the box breaths, take a few deep breaths, really powerful. And it's not just for it's not just a soft resilience skill. It's an important fundamental pillar of resilience.
Yeah, and applying those kind of behavioural strategies, those behavioural mechanisms, as you say, it provides you that platform then, doesn't it, to perhaps then apply more cognitive methods or coping strategies. So,
yeah, absolutely. So I think, well, I'll go into it, but it's about you have to calm the amygdala before you can use the sort of thinking part of your brain. So it is on a sympathetic nervous system, has to be kind of deregulated before you can think clearly.
So, well, let's not pause there, because I think it's really interesting what we're saying. Let's carry this forward, and Charlotte, let me invite you then to talk a little bit more about perhaps more of this cognitive side, more of this emotional coping, or how you view resilience.
Yeah, brilliant. And thanks everyone for being so engaged on the chat function. I have to say, it's a really nice thing that you're obviously clearly not all multitasking and doing your emails in the background, which is very, very good. So I think it's really important that we understand that resilience it's not something that's only accessible, and the reason I'm going to show you this slide of the continuum, it's not only accessible to people who have no mental ill health condition, right? So this is just really to frame resilience in a slightly different way, because for most of us, we can have a preconception that if someone has got a mental illness, they can't be resilient. And that is absolutely not true. So I just want to break that stigma before we dive into the rest of the session. Before 2002, we only ever knew about this x-axis, that some people had illness and some people didn't. And it was believed that if you were on the left-hand side, you probably couldn't cope. And if you're on the right-hand side, then you'd be fine. But in 2002, a researcher called Corey Keyes identified this next axis, this second axis, which is that mental fitness, that resilience, that ability to deal with the challenges of life, that ability to motivate ourselves to do stuff even when we don't want to. And this was really, really fundamental, because what it shows is that, yes, initially people might struggle if they've got a mental illness. They might need to take time off work. They might not need to take time off work. But once they've got the right support and treatment, people with an illness can have optimal mental fitness. And that's as much for people with schizophrenia or psychosis as anxiety or depression. They can be your top performing team members. On the flip side, someone might have always had good mental fitness, a good mental health, and they might be on that top right side, and they might have never had an illness. But any changes can lead to someone having a decline in their mental fitness, and they can end up in that bottom right hand corner. Now, with that, what those triggers might be can very often be what are perceived as positive triggers. So a job promotion, as it was with me, becoming a parent, and that goes for men and women. Men do get postnatal depression as well as women, so it is something that we can see there. So decline, and this bottom right quadrant of people not having an illness and having low mental fitness, they're then less resilient to challenges, they're less engaged in their work, and they are more susceptible to developing an illness. So what we're talking about when we're talking about resilience is, how do we help everybody to move up just a little bit, just move up? And what we see from the research is that if everybody could be just 2 or 3% mentally fitter, more resilient to the challenges of life, more motivated, more engaged, more in that thriving zone, then we'd have a bigger global impact than eliminating all mental illness. And that just takes us all taking action to be a little bit more resilient on an individual level and supporting those around us. So that the skills we're going to talk about today has a massive potential impact at a global level if we could all be just taking a bit more ownership.
Yeah. And I love,
Yeah,
I love, sorry,
so
Charlotte.
carry on.
Yeah, I love that it doesn't have to be a huge change, does it? It doesn't have to be these life transformational changes. It can be small, very simple steps that we can employ.
Yeah, and I would suggest it's more about those. You know, the word fitness implies it all, doesn't it? You don't go for a run and get fit for life.
Exactly.
You don't eat a piece of broccoli and get healthy for life. It's the micro investments that lead to change, and things like sleep. If you're getting less than 6 hours sleep a night, your amygdala, that stress response, is 60% more reactive. So anything you experience is 60% more stress. You're just like, and as I mentioned earlier, when your amygdala, which is like the limbic system, it's the animalistic part of our brain, when that's fired up, our prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking bit of our brain, just can't get a look in. It just can't access. It can't do any rational thinking. So we lose perspective. We get that tunnel vision where we're like, I can't cope. And there's this interesting relationship then that we start to see that we get this shutdown, and then the amygdala starts going, oh, well, what are the other risks? What are the other problems? What else do I need to look out for? And we start to see more problems. And then it makes it harder for that thinking, clarity of thought, perspective taking piece to get a look in. And all of this is then triggering physical reactions in our body. The tense shoulders, or the knotted stomach, or the slight shake, or the heart rate. And our mind is registering all these physical reactions in the body. And it's saying, oh, the body's stressed. Oh, I should be stressed. What should I be stressed about? What should I be worried about? And it's this feedback loop of mind to body and body to mind. And we get caught in this sort of paralysis, as it were. And that's why those breathing exercises, or short mindfulness activity, or going for a walk, as a couple of people said, taking yourself away, that just grounds us so that it just calms the amygdala a little bit. So the rational thinking, the clarity of thought can go, oh, okay, I do know what to do. I can cope. And what we start to see, if you move to the next slide, we start to see this subtle difference between when we go from the peak performance zone, which is that bit of pressure that inspires us and motivates us, when we flip over into that negative stress zone. And that's really, really important. So we need to understand that it's kind of a tipping point, that once we've gone into that stress state, it can be a real steep fall into it, because of this feedback loop that starts to happen. But we do need some pressure, right? If you think back to maybe school, like, would you have ever done anything if you didn't have a deadline? Yeah. So for you, let me ask you this, Grant. What does it feel like for you when you're in that blue zone there, that peak performance zone? And everyone on the call, you can put in the chat function, what does it feel like when you're in that peak performance, that fired up, that excited? There's a little bit of pressure, but you're quite excited.
Yeah.
Focused.
Well, that's it. When I guess I'm immersed in I'm present. When I'm performing at my best, I think you end up putting away those distractions and immersing myself on, I don't perceive it as a threat. I perceive it as a task that I'm engaged with. I guess it's just viewing it not as a stressful situation, but viewing it more as a situation that I'm enjoying, and it's sparking progression, I guess, for me. But I guess the word that jumps to my brain straight away after you asking me was presence. You know, being in that peak performance is when I'm present, or more present, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You're focused because that cerebral cortex is in action. It's there. And what's so interesting, if you look down that chat function, is everyone saying, I can do it. I'm Superwoman. I've got confidence. I'm energized. I can take on the world. It starts to drive our confidence in ourselves. So it shifts the way our brain is functioning. And what happens is when we make that shift, once we think we can do it, well, I think there's a Henry Ford quote, isn't there, that whether you think you can or you can't, you're usually right.
Yes.
But because of how it shifts the brain, is when the brain believes it can do it, it actually then will start to see solutions and opportunities and ways to do it. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we believe we can do things, our brain does things. So it's not just about wishful thinking that you can go, oh, well, if I imagine I can do it, I'll be able to do it. The brain is actually accessing more parts of the brain to be able to do things. It's accessing the hippocampus. So that's the learning and the memory piece. So it can remember all the things you've learned that's going to help you do it.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just an optimizing the brain. So sorry, if you just pop that to the previous one for a moment, the previous slide, that's all right. So what stress is defined it as, in terms of the negative stress on the purple zone there, it's actually defined as our belief that we cannot cope with a situation. So that is what that is. So if you look at who am I thinking of, which is the researcher? I haven't got the nerve. I'm thinking Josephine Linley, and that's not the researcher that I want to be quoting, but it's the psychological and physiological reaction to a situation when we don't believe we can cope. And what's often underpinning that is the way we're thinking about a situation, not the situation itself. So if you move on to the next slide, these are some of the thinking traps that we fall into, and you can press the next click on the screen. It'll stay on that when we go. That these are what we call the performance inhibiting thoughts. Another way to describe these is the automatic negative thoughts. And I love that because it's like they're ants and they're sort of crawling over your head. And we all fall into these patterns of thinking. And when we're doing this style of thinking, we are going to get pulled very rapidly into that stress state. And the reason being, we start to imagine the worst. We start to think, if I don't get this right, the world is going to end. We start to feel out of control. So the body, so the fundamental things for cognitive resilience are that we need to feel that we've got autonomy. So this is based on self-determination theory by Ryan and Decky, and we need to feel we've got autonomy. We need to feel we've got control. We need to feel that we have mastery, the skills to do something, the resources to do something, and we need to have relatedness, and that's about connection. We need to feel like we've got the support network to support us. And if we feel in control, we feel we've got the resources, and we feel like we've got support, we'll stay in that peak performance zone. Unfortunately, these sorts of thinking patterns push us into that state of feeling either that we're not supported, we haven't got the resources, or that we don't have control. So I see some of you are filling out that poll. I'll just talk you through some of these thinking patterns. And Grant, just to pre-warn you, I'm going to come and ask you which of these you fall into in a minute. So
this is just like being on a webinar with Pip. And I'm also going to be, I fall into all of these. It's why one of the reasons I love talking about resilience, probably, because I go, gosh, I really do give myself a hard time. So magnification, that's where we think things are going to be the end of the world, right? So you apply to a new job and you think, oh my gosh, I said that one thing, I'm definitely not going to get the job, right? So you're in a situation and you remember you say one thing and you're like, oh my God, they're always going to hate me. They're never going to give me that job. So we sort of blow things out of control. Or if I don't get this pitch, you're going for, if I don't get this, I'm never going to ever get any work. It's going to be the end of the world, the end of my career. Mental filter and all or nothing. Let's start with the mental filter. Mental filter is something we often do about a situation. So we get to the end of the day and we go, oh, it was just the worst day in the world. Nothing went right. And yet actually you had a really nice drive to work and the sun was shining and you had a lovely lunch with a friend. You got some bad emails and you had some bad meetings in between, but your brain only remembers all the bad stuff. It forgets the little micro positives. Or we do it within ourselves, where we see the positive in other people and we just don't see it in ourselves. So we go, oh my gosh, they're always so perfect. Their presentations are always so perfect. And then we go, if you do something well, you go, oh, it's just a fluke. Oh no, it was just luck. Oh no, it was you. You helped me. It was all you. And we do it to ourselves. All or nothing, it's either a success or a failure. A meeting was either fantastic or it was a nightmare. And we're very, very prone to that. Overgeneralizing is whenever we use words like everything, always, nothing, ever,
Very, very common in modern language. Shoulds or musts. I think we all have a few of these. I should be better at getting into bed at night. I must stop doing my emails at 11 o'clock at night. I should start going to the gym. I must drink more water. And then finally, jumping to conclusions. Mind reading. So it'd be very easy for Grant and I to say when we can't see you all, oh, they're all multitasking in the background. I know they are. Oh, I know everyone's finding this chat really boring. I know no one's engaged. Or fortune telling. I know if I do this, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So which ones do you fall into, Grant?
Well, now that you've said all of them, I think all of them from either this much or this much. I guess, when you actually really do pause and reflect on what each one really does mean. I think the one that's jump into my brain, the shoulds and the musts. I feel like sometimes I should be doing stuff because I don't want to feel a certain way if I don't do a certain thing. And I guess because I used to when I moved into public speaking, I had a real problem with like that performance anxiety, that real worry. And I used to work myself up into such a state. So catastrophizing, that all or nothing was really prevalent there as well, because it had to be perfect or it was a disaster for me at that time. I've learned to ask myself much better questions, and of course, experience, you gain confidence as well. So, all of them. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and I think interesting that one, that should and must, how from a neurological perspective, even if we change, like you said, there's things you want to do but you call it a should. You say there's things I should do because I know it'll make me feel better. Even by using the language of ourselves of I should do this makes us more prone to feeling stressed, rather than I really want to do this because it will make me feel great. I really want to do some exercise every day because I know it's going to make me feel so much more positive today. I really want to switch my computer off at 5 o'clock today so I can enjoy an evening with my kids. If we can just change the language, we already shift ourselves back.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to do should, and actually that's very demotivating, and it's a bit distancy. It's like, oh, it's not possible, it's not accessible, it's not reachable. So I think it's really interesting. I'm not going to go into the NLP and the side of things, but it's quite fascinating. But yeah, if we share those results, you see that we all fall into them. And we've got quite a scattering, and everyone was only allowed to answer one there, but probably most of us fall into more than one, depending on different situations. So in terms of how do we combat this? Well, you got the next slide. You've just got some really basic questions, and I say basic, they're basic and transformational. They're just things we can ask ourselves in those moments. And what I would suggest, and actually, Grant, I'm very happy for you to share these with people afterwards, or everyone, if you want to take a screenshot of some of these. We can literally have a cheat sheet for ourselves to ask these questions, because they're not always going to be relevant in every situation. You might find that in some situations, that first question of what can I control and what do I need to accept is really powerful. And that's very often the case. Like we're battling against what I call, we've got this alternative reality sort of desire that we're like, I don't want it to be this way. It shouldn't be. We do that should with other people. They shouldn't do this. They shouldn't treat me this. Well, they are. Deal with it. And actually just having to say, okay, well, I have to accept that they are always going to treat me that way. I have to accept my dad will always treat me like a 4-year-old girl. I have to accept that. Okay. But what I can do is I can control how I react. I can control how I behave. I can control how we do things, so the things I can take control. You are always going to be CC'd on way too many emails, and it is possibly going to always annoy you because it is the culture we live in. We're always going to be CC'd on a million emails. We're not going to stop that. It's not helpful to keep complaining about it. What might be more helpful is making sure we're not CCing other people unnecessarily, that we're not spending time scrolling through unnecessary emails, time blocking when we're doing emails when we're not. So there are things we can control and things we have to accept. When we are in these moments, actually think, what am I really worried is going to happen? The reason is that the mind has this wonderful way of over-exaggerating our future perceptions. So when we look into the future, we imagine bad things will be so much worse than they really will. And we also imagine good things will be so much better. So our future forecasting is horrific. And what it means is if you look out to the future, the worst is so much worse and the best is so much better that the difference seems incredible. And that's really scary. Because suddenly we go, oh my goodness, there's so much pressure on this tiny micro decision. And so we have to just say, what am I really worried is going to happen? What evidence do I really have that that's going to be happening? But is that really realistic? I sometimes will do best case scenario, worst case scenario, and give myself a percentage for both ends. And then you go, okay, so now what's really likely to happen? And you find that midpoint and you suddenly go, well, actually, I could probably cope with that.
I think,
We
Charlotte,
also, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, because it's what you're saying is really resonating with me. And I mentioned earlier on that I struggled with performance anxiety before, public speaking and stuff like that. And I mentioned that I asked myself those questions, that better questions, and some of the questions that really impacted me were the ones that you were saying. What's the best that can happen today? What's the worst that can happen today? And that last one was really important. What was the most likely thing what's the most likely scenario to happen given my experience, given my readiness, given my, et cetera, et cetera. And when I started asking these questions and listening to my answers, it made a big difference. It put it into perspective for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Grant. And we usually, this is another one, we usually underestimate our own resilience. Like everyone on this webinar, you have 100% resilience rating. You couldn't get a better resilience rating because you're here. You're still here. You're still showing up. You're still doing the work. It's just that we all kind of imagine things, and we start to imagine that everyone else is doing a better job. Everyone else would be able to deal with this situation so much better than ourselves. And that's why that relatedness, that social support network, when we know we've got people around us that we can talk to, and we talk to them and we realize that anyone would find this stuff, then we suddenly go, oh, actually, I'm not alone and I'm okay. And that deregulates that stress response. The other thing is to remember the things that we have overcome, because this is related to that. We underestimate our own resilience. You've probably been through really tough stuff. And we won't spend time diving into that today, but you've probably been through some really hard stuff. And yes, it might not have been easy, it might not have been nice, but you got through. But we can usually draw on learnings, and that's really important. So you can ask yourself these questions. And I think there's also one more question, which I think probably is on the next slide, maybe.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah. We can also remind ourselves that we are usually so bad to ourselves, so harsh in the way we speak to ourselves in those moments. Just as I was touching on there, that we go, everyone else would be coping better. Everyone else would find this fine. And we need to have a bit of self-compassion. So the research of Kristen Neff, and if you want to dive into that, it's self-compassion.org. Really fundamental is go, you know what, I'm human. I find things hard. And the best way to help ourselves feel that is to say, well, what would I actually say to a friend? And you realize that if a friend was telling you what was going on, you'd probably be giving them very different advice to the advice you're giving yourself. Yeah. And equally, to know who you can call, and even knowing that there are people you can reach out to actually makes you feel more in control, makes you feel calmer, brings you back in. If you can then reach out to them and speak to them, what then happens is it triggers the release of oxytocin, which is part of our parasympathetic nervous system response. So it calms you down. From a biochemical perspective, it's part of our de-stress response. So really important that we do have a bit of self-compassion. We give ourselves a break every once in a while, and that we reach out to people.
Yeah, I have launched the poll as well, just encouraging people to reflect around that. And if you haven't jumped on there, take a few seconds now to just jump on. I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's an interesting one because I see there that very few people are saying colleagues. Very few people, well, in fact, none are saying colleagues. And I invite you to say, but if that is the case, is there a colleague you could identify? because sometimes you're going to be at work and your friends might not be available. They might be in meetings at their own workplaces. Family members might be. If you're a manager, can you be that person that your team would reach out to? How can you make sure they know you're there? Because that's going to support them through those moments. Most people who leave a job are not leaving because of the job. They're leaving because of their relationship with their manager or the lack of. And I think if you think about the potential to be that person in a workplace that people just know they could speak to, even if they never do, how could you be that person? It's a really powerful opportunity to make your entire organization more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the next slide is how do we put this into action?
Yeah, so I'm just going to invite you all to think about what different story you could be telling yourself when you fall into those traps that you mentioned earlier. So the next slide's got some ideas of what this might be, but
do you want me to move on to that slide?
Move on to the next slide. This is about how do you turn that performance inhibiting thought, those traps that you were falling into, how do you turn it into something more empowering? So some examples are there on the screen. Just really simple things like, I'll get through it. One I use is, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. They're okay. And it sort of takes me out of this blaming of they should be doing this. Like, I'm okay. They're okay. It's okay. And it's super simple, but I literally have it everywhere. What about yours? Do you have any that you go to or could use?
I like asking those questions I mentioned earlier on, but also, I've done it before. It means it's doable again in the future.
Yeah.
And my past experience doesn't equal my future experience.
Yeah, nice.
Do you know what I mean? So that you mentioned earlier on about predicting the future. Sometimes we're not as quick to predict the future positively. I reflect around that. My past experience doesn't equal my future unless I can, unless I am a fortune teller. I like that. Like, I've done it before. I can do it again.
Nice. Yeah, and that's a bit similar to that one. The second one there, I've got through this before, but I like that bit, that my past is not my future. Interesting, Zahara's putting there that question, which was actually one of the questions on one of the previous slides about what can I learn from this. Really, really powerful. It helps us tap into a bit more of a growth mindset. So really, really powerful. If anyone wants to share their phrase into the chat function, I'd love to see what phrases you think you could ask, or what phrases you think you do ask. Any other thoughts would be great. And I'm just, while people are doing that, I'm just going to answer. There was a question in the Q&A about whether we're negative or positive, and you can keep on the last slide for the moment while people are doing that. Grant, that does our predetermined habits of being positive or negative impact our ability to cope? And it's not, there's different studies on this, but essentially some people who are slightly maybe perceived as negative, actually that helps them and that inspires them and that motivates them. So there's something called defensive pessimism, and actually for a lot of people it helps them to be more resilient because that's quite motivating. Having said that, we do know positive emotions are resilience building emotions, so there is an element there. So it doesn't predetermine, Colin. Also, there's no such thing as a positive or a negative person. We have a sort of set point, yes, but we can move away from that set point. So really important that we understand how we can change. And if you haven't looked into even the principles of epigenetics, really, I'd love to do an entire webinar on that one. But you can change that predisposition through very simple habits. And the research indicates that if you can do that, quite simply, you can make yourself more resilient. But don't be as scared about sometimes having a pessimistic view, or others who have a pessimistic view. It can be very helpful to some people.
Yeah. Sometimes, isn't
Um,
it sometimes a pessimists actually see the situation for what it really is, whereas an optimist sometimes
yeah.
puts that spin on it, you know.
Absolutely. So yeah, exactly. So I call it realistic. There's a realism. There's an optimal realism that we have to find. Great to see everyone's comments in the chat. I'm very conscious of time, Grant.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that we move on to encouraging people to commit to their action point. Great to see you've got, have I done my best? Is there any more I can do? What's the worst that can happen? But I'll pass back to you to inspire people with their progress report.
Yeah, super. Thank you so much. It was wonderful, wonderful reflections and insights there from Charlotte. What we've got for you here is what we call a 1% progress experiment. Now, these are designed really to encourage you to commit to these fairly simple, straightforward experiments. Or alternatively, of course, think of your own one. But we've got 3 options here. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is to commit to these progress experiments. And I'm just going to launch a poll. Now, as you can see, how will you remember your performance enhancing thought? Option 1, as you can see, leave a note on your fridge. Just that little nudge, that little notification, that little reminder. Remember that notification, that cue is very, very important for you to initiate that action. So it's a good little nudge there. Setting alarms through the day to help remind yourself and remember it. I was thinking about this earlier on, Charlotte, and I'm going to do the last one. I'm going to do option 3.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to write down my performance enhancing thoughts and experiment with that more often. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. I bought myself a little bracelet, you see, so this is my reminder, and I hear it tickling along, and I've sort of now got an audio trigger. It's a bit like a Pavlov's dog situation, that's supposed to remind me, and it does work.
Great. Okay, so we've got a variety. I don't think I need to share that progress poll, but actually in the lead is option 1 poll at the moment. So let me end that poll. I'll share the results very quickly, so hopefully people can see those results. But there, again, there's a little bit of a spectrum there, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Now we're coming to the end of the webinar, and we're just going to recap very quickly here about rediscovering your resilience, and we spoke about many things. Charlotte was amazingly in depth with some of the information she was sharing and hints and tips and ideas, which is wonderful. The idea of demonizing stress is not helpful. It's not always a bad thing. Discover that sweet spot, as we spoke about earlier on, between pushing yourself to achieve new things and also the importance of rest and recovery as well. Cognitive traps. I like the phrase becoming a thought detective. So just be curious about your thoughts, those cognitive traps that most people make some of the time and some people make all the time. So familiarizing ourselves with these different thinking errors, thinking traps or cognitive traps actually helps us cope much more effectively. And here we've got changing your pits into pets. And what I'm going to do just to finish up is launch the feedback poll for everybody. So before you escape this session today, if I can invite you just to spend the next 20 seconds, 30 seconds, just completing that poll, that feedback poll about what did you feel was most useful from this session today? What was most
Yeah, I'll also, just to let everyone know, I'm going to send Grant a few books and YouTubes and other stuff to get you keep thinking about this. One about the upside and the positive of stress, a book. I'll add one in on that sort of optimism, the pessimism, negative, the sort of pessimism, optimism thing, one called Learned Optimism. So I'll send you all a few books and bits as well to just keep you thinking.
Yeah, great stuff. And we'll send follow-up emails to the people that have attended or perhaps even missed this opportunity today as well. So Charlotte, it just really remains for me to say thank you so much. But you've been incredibly insightful and knowledgeable today. But if people wanted to contact you, Charlotte, how would they find out a little bit more about you? Where would they go, and how would they do that?
Well, my website is just Charlotte@CharlotteWiseman. So my email is just charlotte@charlottewiseman.com. So I'll pop the charlottewiseman.com in the chat function. But LinkedIn is a really good way just to stay in touch without, just on the ongoing. That's the place I'm most visible, I guess. So Charlotte Wiseman, Wellbeing and Leadership Consultants, and my personal account's attached to that. So that's the best way. I'm on Instagram, but I'm not particularly present. So probably LinkedIn is the way to connect.
Super. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much. And you can join us here at Wellbeing People on our Wellbeing People communities, both again in LinkedIn and Facebook as well. I understand people, if you need to jump off and turn around and go and get some movement medicine and grab a drink, then super. It just remains for me to say, Charlotte, thank you so much. It's been so lovely hearing your passion around this topic, and it's been really, really insightful for me as well. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy today.
Oh, it's been brilliant to work with you again. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being so engaged on the chat function. Hope we can do another one in the future.
Absolutely. Don't forget to complete the feedback poll. And we'll see you all hopefully very soon, and we'll share some information, and you can contact us for more information if you need it. But thank you, Charlotte, again. And thank you everybody for your time and attention. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and have fun.